Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Matt from Matt's Bookshelf, and today we're talking about second chances. Recently, during the month of March, I reread Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel as part of Steve Donahue's STD book club. And this is a particularly interesting time to reread this book because I read it for the first time in March of 2022. And if you watched my 6-month wrap-up video, you would know that, at least for my first going for Wolf Hall, I really did not enjoy it. To flash back to the early part of 2022, I had watched The Last Duel by Ridley Scott, and before anyone accuses me of any assumptions, I know that Wolf Hall and the reign of Henry VIII does not take place in the same time period as The Last Duel, but they are relatively close enough that I had already owned Wolf Hall, and I was in the mood for more medieval stories, even though I don't think this is technically medieval. I just really wanted to read something that was close enough to that time period, and so I also really wanted to read Wolf Hall, and I found it was a perfect excuse to finally get to tackling the book because I was in the mood for a story of a similar quality. And I knew enough about King Henry VIII and about Thomas Cromwell in order to, and Anne Boleyn as well, to get a vague idea of where the story was going. I'm not an expert on this subject, but I do know what happens to each of the characters, and I feel like this is going to be the perfect book for me. And then I started to read it, and I really did not enjoy it. I'm going to preface this statement by saying that the writing style that Hilary Mantel uses here is not one that I'm particularly used to. It's in the present tense, so you feel like you're in the action as it's going on. And there's also a lot of uses of the word he, usually referring to Cromwell, but not always. And it was really putting me off on my first read, and it's going to sound so melodramatic to say this, but I really couldn't get into the book, and I think a large part of that was due to the writing style. It was so hard for me to overcome that when I was reading the book, I felt disassociated from the actual story. Like, I felt like every sentence was in its own island, and I couldn't really put things together. And I never really had that problem with a book before, and I grew frustrated because this book is praised to high heavens by anyone who's read it, and I was reading it, I could not get into it for my life, and I thought it was being obtuse for the sake of being obtuse, and I got frustrated, and I would sit down and be like, now I'm gonna focus on the prose, I'm gonna try to get into it, and every time I tried, I just pretty much failed, and I could see brilliance in it, and I could recognize it, but it just felt far away from me. And so I kept the book because I feel like I had in the back of my mind that eventually I was going to give it another go. And when Steve announced that he was going to do this book as part of his book club, I saw it as a perfect opportunity for me to give it a second chance. And on that second chance, I can safely say that I did find the brilliance that others have seen in the book. Wolf Hall is one of the best character studies I've ever read, period. So the book follows Thomas Cromwell, beginning when he's a young man, I would say maybe 20 or so, and then it flashes forward through time, and then ends probably when he's in his mid-40s or late 40s. And I don't want to go into spoilers to specifically what happens in case you don't know the story, but it's a trilogy, so it ends without him dying. It's just part of his life. It's not the full course of his life. And there's so much subtlety once I was able to overcome the writing style and appreciate the writing style. There's every line, or nearly every line, there's so many dry quips, and there's so many sad scenes, and there's so much to garner out of any individual sentence that Hilary Mantel's work and subtlety here is truly commendable. And it got to the point where even though I've already read the book, I felt like I was reading it again for the first time, and I was really getting so much more out of it on the second going than I did get on the first going. So Wolf Hall pretty much covers the rise of Thomas Cromwell, so you get the introduction of him being in the court of King Henry VIII. And King Henry VIII, I think, on this reread, has become my favorite character in the story. My writer brain goes off when I'm reading his scenes specifically because King Henry VIII, the real King Henry VIII, is a fascinating figure, and I think Hilary Mantel really captures the mental, the neuroticism of the character. He can be incredibly charming and incredibly hostile. He can sometimes be understanding and then completely selfish and self-centered. And all of it, the extreme emotions of the character and how they sway, very quickly. For a lesser writer, I think that people would have criticized the character for being inconsistent. But here, his inconsistencies are what makes him a consistent character. And I just really feel like for Mantell here, like every word basically that this character was saying was probably considered so delicately and so finely, because in order to adapt King Henry VIII, the real life historical figure, you need to have that kind of precision in your prose, and he does not hold back. And just the character interpretations in general, for the history, as far as I'm aware, it follows this period very accurately, but where Mantell takes creative liberties is within the characters themselves. So Anne Boleyn, who is normally portrayed as being like a hero of this time period, is very much, she's not a villain, but she has a lot more flaws than I think that another writer would give her. And Thomas Cromwell obviously is considered to be a villain in history, but here he is the hero, and he does make bad decisions, but but you understand them through the context of the rest of the story. But yes, Henry VIII, by far, I just found his character to be so fascinating, and I found Mantell's handling of his caprices to be really well done and really believable. And again, like the charming, the calculating, there's like one scene where he's hunting and Mantell writes as a quip like he snapped his fingers to change the course of the wind. That just tells you everything you need to know about Henry VIII. And there's just so many small lines like that feel so well considered. And if this was not a first edition, I would have been highlighting the hell out of this book, because it's a first edition, so I don't really want to mark it up. But if I read it again with a lesser copy, I would absolutely be marking up tons and tons of parts, because it's very funny in some senses, but also incredibly tragic. It handles, because at the time period, executions were completely legal if they were allowed by the king, and they go into such specific detail about burning people at the stakes, burning heretics at the stake, and heretics are basically people who defied whatever King Henry VIII wanted to do. And then, so like that, they go into incredible detail there, but also there's like one scene where they're talking about disemboweling rebels, and there's a line where Mantell is like, even the strongest of the rebels cried as they were being brought to the rack to be disemboweled, and it does not hold back on the actual violence of this time period, which is juxtaposed to like the aristocracy and these royal dances and feasts. And then at the same time that the next day someone can be burned at the stake, have their whole, and then be reduced to just ash on the floor. And the juxtaposition between like the illusion of class versus the actual violence that can take place in society is so well handled here. On the topic of brutality in this society in Wolf Hall, Thomas Cromwell, in a debate with his rival Thomas More, has the following to say to this man, Thomas More, who is a religious figure, but also a sadistic torturer. So in this scene, Cromwell calls out More and Christian beliefs as a whole, this illusion of peace and, wanting peace. And but in actuality, they're elitist, and they have no problem, murdering and torturing people if they feel justified in it for religious reasons. Oh, for Christ's sake, he says, a lie is no less a lie because it is 1,000 years old. Your undivided church has liked nothing better than persecuting its own members, burning them and hacking them apart when they stood by their own conscience, slashing their bellies open and feeding their guts to dogs. You call history your aid, but what is history to you? It is a mirror that flatters Thomas More, but I have another mirror. I hold it up, and it shows a vain and dangerous man. And when I turn it about, it shows a killer. For you will drag down with you God knows how many. You will only have the suffering and not your martyr's gratification. You are not a simple soul, so you don't try to make the simple. You know I have respected you. You know I have respected you since I was a child. I would rather see my only son dead. I would rather see them cut off his head than see you refuse this oath and give comfort to every enemy of England. I could really go on and on about how fantastic this book is. My thoughts on it have basically done a 180 since this reread. And so I posed the question to everyone else who has made this far into this video. What books have you given a second chance that you have actually felt justified in giving that second chance to? Wolf Hall is the main example for me right now. I can't really think of another. I usually don't DNF books, except for 2 books within the past 10 years. American Gods and A Farewell to Arms. I don't really know what commonality the two books have other than terrible protagonists, but that's the only commonality I can think of. I finished Wolf Hall when I read it for the first time, but I did not enjoy it, and it felt like I'm running a marathon. But on this reread, it did not feel like running a marathon. It felt like every page had significance and it was an enjoyment to indulge in. So yes, what books have you given a second chance to? Are there any books that you read for the first time that you feel like you were on the precipice of getting something out of it, but didn't quite get something out of it, and that you want to reread again? Wolf Hall, again, is a prime example for me. Is a book that I kept because I was like, man, I feel something here, but I can't quite grasp it yet. And so having this book club was a perfect excuse for me to finally get back into it. And so yeah, those are my questions for you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of Wolf Hall, because this book is incredible. For any reading advice I could give for this book, I would say whenever Hilary Mantel says he, unless you're like absolutely positive she's referring to another character, assume that she's talking about Cromwell. That is the best advice I can give. Also, read it slowly, because there's no clear. Sometimes dialogue is not put in italics, and sorry, in italics, and then sometimes thoughts are not put in italics, and sometimes they are, and sometimes it just goes back and forth between the third person present tense and then Cromwell's stream of thought. I mean, and then Cromwell's inner monologue, I should say. So take it slowly, because he blends a lot of different writing styles together here, and it can only really be appreciated, to me at least, if you take it slowly. So yes, thank you, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video.